Venkataraman, Assistant Secretary of Commerce in the Biden administration. Thank you for being with us here on France 24.
Happy to be here.
You're on a trip first to France and then to the Baltic states.
Yes.
Your remit is commerce, but I imagine there'll be a lot of worried interlocutors wondering if now it's all Israel and no more helping the war effort in Ukraine.
I don't think that's a real worry. I think the president was very clear that there is unequivocal support both from the administration and from majorities of both parties in Congress. So I don't think that's a real worry. I think our friends know full well that we stand behind Ukraine 110%.
We have a situation where we are kind of in the world's economies since February of 2022 are in shift. And a lot of it has to do with military considerations. There's more conflict. First Ukraine, and now obviously what we're seeing unfold in the Middle East. I know there was a G20 summit in Rome 2 years ago where the French and the Americans sat down to talk about how you do the commerce of wartime economies. What's come of that?
Well, I think what you'll see is that during these times, as challenging as they are, it really calls for us to be more closely intertwined, more closely focused on working together to get through these times. And I think the fortunate thing is that with the United States and France, with such a long-standing history, with relations going back to our very founding, it actually becomes very easy to cooperate through these challenging times.
How to regulate sort of arms procurement, that kind of thing?
No, I think it's really about ensuring the stability of the economy, at least from the commerce perspective, ensuring the stability of the economy through these challenging times, navigating through the unpredictability, supporting our businesses in this unpredictable environment, and making sure that during this time we're providing them the help that they need to get through.
How much of that unpredictability is, well, down to energy? And we've seen it in the last couple of days with the spike in oil prices, and that hits all companies.
Well, I think with these types of actions, there are natural spikes that occur. Certainly with the unlawful Russian aggression, we've seen a series of adverse economic consequences that have hit a number of countries around the world very hard, not just with respect to the price of oil, but also with respect to food security and in other areas. And so I think what we're doing is we're doing our part to not only try to tamp down the Russian war machine, but we're also working with our partners and allies to make sure that they can get through these adverse consequences as best they can with support from the United States and all of our friends.
Yeah, and part of it is trying to contain disinformation. And we've just seen it again in the last couple of days. The platform formerly known as Twitter, again making headlines. Its owner, Elon Musk, promoting accounts that spread untruths about Israel and Gaza, letting gruesome images run rampant, fake accounts as well. Here in Europe, we're trying to regulate it. We feel as though the United States is sort of behind the times on that. You shouldn't be allowed to say whatever you want on such a powerful platform.
Well, I'm glad you raised this. This is actually one of the areas that we're working very closely with our European friends on through the US-EU Trade and Technology Council. We've identified this problem quite squarely and know that it's not a solution that only one country or another can resolve, but it really is going to take coordination among our friends to work with the private sector to address these types of concerns and ensure that misinformation isn't spread intentionally or unintentionally.
Work with the private sector or regulate the private sector? If you work with Elon Musk, who's made kind of pro-Putin announcements at times, where's that going to lead?
Well, I don't want to speak about particular individuals. I do think when we engage in this kind of activity, there's a role for regulation, as the president has acknowledged, and as the private sector itself has acknowledged. But there is also a role for working with the private sector. So you've got to do both. It's not either or.
Do you see the Digital Services Act that the EU is unfolding as a beautiful blueprint that you'd like to follow, or a potential threat to US tech titans?
Well, we certainly support the objectives of the Digital Services Act, and I think we've worked very closely with our European counterparts to make sure that as that act moves into implementation, it's done so in a way that advances those shared objectives. So we're very anxious to see how it does move forward, and I think there's elements of that we strongly support.
The European Parliament last week overwhelmingly ratified a bill known as the Anti-Coercion Instrument. It allows for retaliation against countries that put economic pressure on EU countries. I know your trip's going to take you most notably to Lithuania, which has been the target of China for its close ties with Taiwan. Your thoughts on the EU, which has been criticized for being too open
Well, I think what the EU is doing is it's just protecting itself. This is what it's not only entitled to do, but that is its responsibility. And I think we feel the same in the United States, that were any country to engage in any activity that tried to undermine our interests at home, we would take appropriate actions to make sure that didn't happen. And so we welcome the EU interest and vocalization of its efforts to protect Lithuania and all member states of the European Union.
That legislation was first drafted when Donald Trump was still president, and back then steel tariffs shocked the Europeans. It's kind of a feeling that some say that the Biden administration, with its big stimulus package for its green transition, and it's also putting America first, to use Trump's parlance.
Yeah, I don't think that's right. I think it's very clear that the Inflation Reduction Act is really the single most incredible investment in clean energy in American history, and is really the most impactful event you've seen with respect to addressing climate change on the part of the United States. And I think our European partners and many of our friends around the world welcome that.
One final question for you, and I know this sounds a little technical perhaps. Cloud computing. You talked about allies at the beginning of the discussion. How do you build trust in cloud computing when I'm seeing statistics from 2021? Amazon, Microsoft, and Google had 80% of the French market when it came to cloud computing, including in very sensitive sectors like defense. Is that a good or a bad thing?
Well, I think it reflects the confidence and trust that French entities have in American companies in this space. I certainly don't view it as a question of doubting trust. In fact, I think having American companies invested in France and committed to serving French companies is a testament to our longstanding partnership and should be encouraged.
If Mr. Trump returns to office in 2024?
He'll have his own job to do.
But I mean, would having 80% of your cloud computing in the United States still be something that's a good idea for Europeans, or will they be, as you put it, looking out for their own interests at that?
Look, I think American companies are independent. They're not controlled by the government. And so I think the fact that they do business in France will always remain a good thing for France and good thing for the United States as well. I don't think that changes depending on the administration.
Arun Venkataraman, are we entering a period where the world's not as open for business as it was?
I think there are parts of the world that are not as open for business. I think what we have to look at is how we engage our partners, how we make sure our partners are trusted and reliable, and that they're the partners that we want to focus on as we engage in open and fair trade with those partners. I do think we're in a different era than we were before. That does not mean we just blindly trade with anyone and everyone without regard for the consequences. We have learned that there are consequences to unbridled trade, including consequences for our national security. So I think what you've seen is just a more attentive take to trade policy than we had before.